If you're working on a computer in your daily life, you're likely familiar with some sort of keyboard shortcuts. Keyboard shortcuts can really change your life and your workflow for the better. I've been a Windows user for many years, and there are some keyboard shortcuts I use every day, multiple times a day. These are some of my most used keyboard shortcuts that I use regularly. There's a lot more than this, but these are the ones I use most often. Firstly, and I almost didn't even talk about this one because it is so useful and so ingrained into my everyday workflow that I hardly even think about that anymore. Copying, pasting, and cutting. This is where you highlight a section of text or you right-click copy, but if you highlight a section of text, you can hit Ctrl C, copies that to the clipboard, which is a virtual holding spot on your computer. You can then go to another document, chat window, Google search, whatever you're doing, hold down Control and hit V, and that will paste that text in there. Control X is another variation of this, but instead of copying, it cuts. If you highlight a section of text from an editable document, like a Word document or a OneNote document, and hit Control X, it will remove that text from there and put it on the clipboard. And then when you paste it somewhere else, it essentially moves all the text from there over to this. Another pro tip is your clipboard history. When I'm working, I will copy something and paste it, and then I'll go somewhere else and I'll copy something else and I go, oh shoot, I gotta go back and find that thing so I could copy it again to paste it. You don't have to do that. Windows has a built-in clipboard history, and all you gotta use is your Windows key, V. The first time I think it asks you, do you want to turn on clipboard history? But after that, everything you copy is gonna be saved into that history. I think it saves maybe the last 10 by default, but usually that's good enough for me. Typically I'm copying 3 or 4 things that I'm going back and forth between. If I need to paste it into somewhere else and it's repetitive information, but maybe there's something else I don't wanna retype, I'll just hit Windows V and I can look back and I can click on one of the last things I copied and paste it into multiple places. Windows V has been huge to my workflow, especially working with data or different information or repetitive things pasting in. Windows V can be very helpful if you're copying a lot of information that you need to have available later and you don't want to have to go back and find it to recopy it. Another keyboard shortcut that I use all the time is Ctrl W, and this is to close browser tabs. Google Chrome, Microsoft Edge, Opera, Firefox, whatever you're using, you can use Ctrl W or on a Mac Command W to close the browser tab you're on, instead of you having to go up and find the little X, which only shows up when you hover over it. Ctrl W can be very helpful. One of the things that you'll probably use more often, and I use this a lot, when you closed a browser tab that you forgot you actually needed or you accidentally clicked it and closed it, all you gotta do is hold down Ctrl, Shift, and T, and it will reopen your last closed browser tab. Sometimes I'll go through and I'll close a bunch of browser tabs and then go, uh-oh, there was one that I was still working on. Which one was that? When did I close that? So I'll just hold Ctrl Shift T, Ctrl Shift T, 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 and it'll bring back all my recently closed browser tabs. This is hugely helpful for those of you who accidentally close browser tabs sometime and you want to get them reopened. The other great thing about modern web browsers is often you can go into the settings menu and you can see recently closed tabs. So if you accidentally closed everything and you didn't want to, maybe you had 4 or 5 browser tabs that you were still working in, you could go up to the 3 little dots or your settings menu in whatever browser you're using, recently closed tabs, and typically there will be a group there that you can select and it will reopen all of them for you. Just because you accidentally closed out of a browser window and it says it didn't come back doesn't mean that there's no way to get everything back and get right back to where you were working. Now, I think a lot of people know about the keyboard shortcut to lock your computer, especially at work. You need to be locking your computer. Now, you might say, I have nothing on my workstation, that it's not private information. I still recommend everyone locks their workstation when walking away from it. We actually use this as a tactic in a couple organizations where we did have secure information, or there were things on the screen potentially. Employees had access to secure information. When they would walk away from the computer without locking it, we would change their desktop on them to remind them you need to lock your workstation when you walk away. A lot of people I know lock their workstation by hitting Ctrl Alt Delete and then they click the lock option. That's a few extra steps and more than you have to do. All you really got to use is Windows key L will lock it, take it to the login screen, and you can walk away. This has become so much a habit of mine. Even when I'm home and I'm just stepping away for a moment, I will often, just from muscle memory, reach over and go Windows key L. I'm locking my computer when I don't even have to. Another keyboard shortcut that I use in Windows all the time, Windows key E. This opens up your file explorer or the This PC or My Computer, whatever you think of it as, to get to your files. And if you need to have multiple windows, maybe you're dragging files, you can just hit Windows key E multiple times. Usually when I'm transferring files, I do this a lot. So I'll hit Windows key E and I'll just keep holding down Windows and hit E again, and I'll open up 2 different windows, put them side by side, and then I can drag files over or look at 2 different folders or whatever I need to do. Windows key E, one of my most used keyboard shortcuts, and it's relatively simple. Another keyboard shortcut I used to use a lot, I don't really really use it anymore, so this is just considered an honorable mention, is Windows key D. So if you hit Windows D, it'll minimize all your windows for you really quick, and then you can hit it again and it'll bring them all back up. This is one I used when I was working at an organization where people would come in and ask me questions. I had an issue with reading what was on the screen in front of me when they were talking to me, and then I wasn't fully listening to what they were saying. Windows D to minimize everything, and I didn't have things on the screen distracting me. The last keyboard shortcut I'm going to mention is something that's extremely helpful for browser troubleshooting. If you've ever been working on a website and something isn't quite working right, maybe an image isn't loading or a website isn't loading and you know it should load, using the keyboard shortcut Ctrl Shift Delete will bring you straight to the clear cache window in pretty much any browser. On a Mac, Command Shift Delete will do the same thing, and that allows you to clear the cache and the cookies for the last hour or for all time. Selecting all time and clicking clear, that will wipe out all the cache and cookies on your web browser, and typically that resolves more than 90% of browser issues. So those are my most used shortcuts that I incorporate into my daily workflow. I use these shortcuts all the time in my personal life as well as in my professional life. I think you can get a lot of benefit from them as well.